Arizona Territory, 1885. The town of Whispering Pines sat at the edge of civilization like a last desperate outpost against the encroaching wilderness. Dust swirled through streets barely deserving of the name, where hope came to die and dreams were buried with shallow ceremony. In this unforgiving land, a man measured his worth by his ability to stand alone against the elements, against other men, and against his own demons. Adam Xanders knew this truth better than most. At 26, he had already lived several lifetimes' worth of solitude, convinced that attachment was merely an invitation to pain. The harsh frontier had taught him one lesson above all others. Love was a luxury that men like him could not afford, not when survival demanded every ounce of focus and strength. His ranch, the Lone Pine, sprawled across 500 acres of hard-won territory 15 miles outside town. It wasn't much compared to the cattle barons further east, but it was his, paid for with sweat, blood, and a stubborn refusal to fail where his father had. The old man's grave sat atop the only real hill on the property, marked by a wooden cross that weather had already begun to wear away, just as the frontier erased all men, eventually. "No sense getting attached to anything out here," Adam told his horse, a dun-colored gelding named Scout, as they rode the fence line on a crisp October morning. The animal's ears flicked back at his voice, perhaps the only creature that had heard Adam speak more than 10 words together in months. "This land will take it all from you in the end." Adam adjusted his worn Stetson, shielding his blue eyes from the rising sun. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked from dawn to dusk, he cut an impressive figure. His face, tanned by constant exposure, retained a youthfulness that belied the old soul behind his eyes. A 3-day stubble shadowed his jawline, not from fashion but from the simple fact that shaving seemed a waste of precious time when living alone. He had built his life around self-sufficiency. Each day followed the same reliable pattern. Mend what was broken, tend to the modest herd, hunt when necessary, and sleep with one eye open. Neighbors were few and interactions fewer. The townsfolk called him standoffish. Adam called it survival. As he rode back toward his cabin, the morning sun illuminated something unusual on the horizon, a plume of dust rising from the main road. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. Adam's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle in his saddle holster. The approaching wagon lurched awkwardly along the rutted path, one wheel clearly damaged and threatening to give out entirely. 2 figures sat on the bench, an older man with stooped shoulders and a slender form beside him partially obscured by a bonnet. Adam watched their approach with narrowed eyes, calculating the threat and finding it minimal. Still, caution had kept him alive this long. He dismounted, looping Scout's reins around a fence post, and waited with his rifle held casually but ready. "Hello, the house," the old man called when they were within earshot. "Beg pardon for the intrusion, but our wagon's about done for. Might we trouble you for water and a place to make repairs?" "Water's in the trough," Adam replied, nodding toward the wooden structure near the barn. "Tools are in the shed if you need them." The wagon creaked to a halt and the old man climbed down stiffly. "Much obliged. Name's Hiram Holbrook. This here's my daughter, Penelope." The young woman descended from the wagon with surprising grace, despite the evident fatigue in her movements. When she straightened and pushed back her bonnet, Adam felt an unexpected jolt in his chest. At perhaps 20 years old, Penelope Holbrook possessed a quiet beauty that didn't announce itself but rather revealed itself slowly, like water in the desert. Her hair, the rich brown of fertile soil, fell in waves past her shoulders. Eyes the color of sage met his directly, neither coquettish nor afraid. She wore a faded blue dress that had clearly seen better days, patched in several places but clean. There was a dignity in her bearing that transcended her trail-worn appearance. "Thank you for your hospitality, mister." Her voice carried the slight lilt of an Eastern education. "Xanders." Adam Xanders, the words felt rusty in his mouth, unused to polite conversation. "And it's not hospitality, just water and tools." If his brusqueness offended her, she didn't show it. "Nevertheless, we're grateful, Mr. Xanders. We've had a difficult journey." Adam nodded curtly and turned away, busying himself with unsaddling Scout. He had no intention of engaging further, yet found himself speaking again almost against his will. "Where you headed?" The old man answered while examining their damaged wheel. "Prescott, originally. My brother had a mercantile there, but we received word he passed on before we arrived. Now, I suppose we're headed wherever opportunity presents itself." Adam grunted noncommittally, but his mind was already calculating. The wheel wouldn't be a quick fix, not without proper parts. The nearest town with a wheelwright was Whispering Pines, and night would fall long before they could reach it. "You'll need to stay the night," he said finally, the words feeling like pebbles in his mouth. "Dangerous country after dark. There's a linta behind the barn you can use. I'll ride into town tomorrow for parts." Penelope stepped forward, surprise evident on her face. "That's very kind, but we wouldn't want to impose." "It's not kindness," Adam cut her off. "Just sense, these hills have mountain lions and worse. I don't need dead travelers on my conscience." Her father touched her arm gently. "We accept your offer, Mr. Xanders, and will compensate you for the trouble." Adam waved away the mention of payment. "Get your things, there's a pump by the lean-to." "I'll bring some firewood." With that, he strode toward the barn, eager to escape the uncomfortable sensation of having strangers, especially a young woman, disturbing the carefully maintained solitude of his existence. That evening, against his better judgment, Adam found himself sharing his supper with the travelers. The lean-to, really just a three-sided shelter used for storing hay, offered little comfort. Something about the dignified way the Holbrooks accepted their circumstances had pricked at his conscience until he'd grudgingly invited them to his table. His cabin was Spartan, one main room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden table and chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A few books sat on a crude shelf, their spines cracked with use. The only personal touch was a daguerreotype of a woman and young boy, its silver frame incongruously fine among the rustic surroundings. "This stew is excellent," Hiram commented, breaking a silence that had stretched through most of the meal. "You're a fine cook for a bachelor." "Necessity," Adam replied, then, feeling the response too curt even by his standards, added, "Man eats poorly out here, he doesn't last long." Penelope's eyes moved around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings. "Have you been in Arizona territory long, Mr. Xanders?" 8 years, he pushed his empty bowl aside. Came west from Missouri after the war. "You fought?" Hiram asked. Adam nodded once, his face closing like a shutter. "Union." Understanding the unspoken boundary, Hiram changed the subject. "We came from Boston. I taught mathematics at a small college until my position was eliminated. When my brother wrote of opportunities out west, it seemed Providence. Only to find he'd passed," Penelope added softly. "We learned upon reaching Santa Fe that he died of fever 3 months ago." Something in her quiet resilience struck Adam. Here was a young woman of obvious education and refinement, reduced to wandering the frontier with an aging father, yet maintaining her dignity. It spoke of an inner strength at odds with her delicate appearance. "What will you do now?" The question slipped out before Adam could stop it. Hiram sighed. "Find work where we can, I suppose. I'm not as young as I once was, but my mind is sharp. Perhaps I could clerk or keep books." Penelope straightened her shoulders. "And I can teach. I was educated at the Boston Female Academy. I can instruct in literature, mathematics, music." "Not much call for music teachers in Whispering Pines," Adam interrupted. "Town's barely hanging on since the silver strike played out." "Then we'll move on," she replied evenly. "We'll find our place." Adam found himself studying her more closely. There was something in her gaze, a determined hope that should have seemed foolish in this unforgiving territory, yet instead radiated a quiet strength. It unsettled him. "I'll leave at first light," he said abruptly, standing from the table. "Should be back with wheel parts by midday. You're welcome to whatever's in the pantry for breakfast." "Thank you, Mr. Xanders," Penelope said. "You've shown us great kindness." "It's nothing," he muttered, uncomfortable with her gratitude, "just helping travelers on their way." That night, lying on a bedroll by the fireplace, he'd insisted the older man take his bed. Adam listened to the unfamiliar sounds of other human beings breathing in his space. It should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it stirred something long buried, a memory of family and connection that he'd worked hard to forget. "Foolishness," he whispered to the darkness. In the morning, he would fix their wagon and send them on their way. His life would return to its proper order, alone as it should be. As it must be, the ride to Whispering Pines took Adam just under 2 hours at a brisk pace. The town consisted of one main street lined with false-fronted buildings in various states of disrepair. What had once been a promising settlement during the brief silver boom had withered into a shadow of itself, home now to those too stubborn or too broken to leave. He tied Scout outside Jensen's general store, the bell announcing his entrance. The proprietor, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, looked up in surprise. Adam Xanders, twice in 1 month, must be some kind of record. Need wagon parts, Jensen. Got travelers with a broken wheel out at my place. The shopkeeper raised bushy eyebrows. Travelers at your place, thought you were allergic to company. Adam ignored the comment. Got what I need or not? As Jensen rummaged through his inventory, the door opened again, admitting Sheriff Miles Carson, a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican and Civil Wars who maintained order through equal parts respect and fear. Xanders, the lawman, nodded. Rare sight in town, everything all right out your way. Fine, just need supplies. Carson leaned against the counter. Heard you've got visitors, news travels fast, older gent and a young woman. Adam frowned. How'd you know that? Greeley passed your place on his mail route, said he saw strangers at your cabin. Something in the sheriff's tone put Adam on alert. What of it? Their wagon broke down. Carson studied him for a moment. Might want to be careful who you take in, Xanders. Had a wire from Santa Fe Marshal yesterday. They're looking for a man and young woman traveling together. Swindlers who have been working their way west, passing bad bank drafts and stealing valuables. The Holbrooks. Adam shook his head. Old man's harmless, they're just down on their luck. Holbrook is it? Carson's expression remained neutral. Wire didn't mention names. Just described an older gentleman and a young lady posing as father and daughter. Very refined, educated sounding. He shrugged. Probably nothing, but thought you should know, being as you keep to yourself and might not be used to spotting such things. Jensen returned with the wheel parts and Adam paid quickly, his mind churning. Could he have been so easily fooled? The Holbrooks, if that was even their name, had seemed genuine in their misfortune. Yet doubt crept in like a cold draft. The story about the brother in Prescott, the conveniently broken wheel, it could all be an elaborate ruse to gain his trust. Even now, they could be ransacking his cabin, stealing the small lockbox where he kept the proceeds from his last cattle sale. By the time Adam rode back to the ranch, his suspicions had hardened into certainty. He'd been a fool to let strangers into his home. This was precisely why he kept to himself. People couldn't be trusted, especially not on the frontier where desperation drove many to crimes they might never have considered back east. He approached cautiously, rifle at the ready, but the scene that greeted him was not what he expected. Penelope stood in his vegetable garden, harvesting what remained of the season's yield. She had tied her hair back with a simple ribbon and rolled up her sleeves, working with efficient movements. Her father sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with careful concentration. As Adam dismounted, Penelope looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. A smile transformed her face, lighting it with a warmth that caught him off guard. Mr. Xanders. You've returned sooner than we expected. She gestured toward the garden. I hope you don't mind. I thought to prepare a proper meal as thanks for your hospitality. Hiram stood, pocketing his knife. Were you able to find the parts we need, sir? Adam studied them both, searching for signs of deception. I found them. Wonderful, perhaps we can assist with the repairs. The old man seemed genuinely eager to help. After dinner, Penelope insisted, I've found some late tomatoes and herbs that will make a fine accompaniment to the rabbit stew I've started. Adam's gaze swept the property, looking for evidence of theft or dishonesty. Everything appeared untouched. His suspicion wavered but didn't dissipate entirely. You didn't need to do that, he said, nodding toward the garden. I wanted to, she replied simply. Idleness has never suited me, and you've been most generous. Throughout dinner, Adam watched them closely, listening for inconsistencies in their story. They spoke of Boston with detailed knowledge of the college where Hiram had taught, of Penelope's education. If they were lying, they'd constructed an elaborate fiction. Mr. Xanders, Penelope said as they finished the meal, which had indeed been far superior to his usual fare, I noticed your bookshelf. You have several volumes I recognize from my studies. Adam glanced at the modest collection. They were my mother's. Tennyson, she observed, and Wordsworth, you enjoy poetry. I read, he left it at that, unwilling to admit how those books had been his companions through lonely winters, how the words connected him to a world beyond his isolation. Would you permit me to borrow one during our stay? I left most of our books in storage in Santa Fe until we could establish ourselves somewhere. The request seemed innocent enough, yet Adam remembered the sheriff's warning. Was this how they operated, gaining trust through shared interests before taking advantage? Take whichever you like, he said finally. Now, about that wheel, we should fix it before dark. The repair took less time than expected with 3 sets of hands working together. Hiram proved surprisingly knowledgeable about mechanics, and Penelope's slender fingers managed detailed work that Adam's larger hands found challenging. By sunset, the wagon stood ready for travel. We can leave at first light, Hiram announced, wiping grease from his hands. Thanks to your help, Mr. Xanders. Adam nodded, still conflicted. If they were the swindlers Carson had mentioned, they'd have no reason to stay now that their transportation was fixed. If they were honest travelers, he was doing them a disservice with his suspicion. No need to rush off, he found himself saying. Roads are rough, better to start fresh. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the yard, Adam sat on his porch cleaning his rifle. Penelope emerged from the cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee. May I join you? She asked, offering him one of the steaming mugs. He accepted with a nod, making room on the rough-hewn bench. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. It's beautiful here, Penelope said finally. There's a peace to it. In Boston, one rarely sees the stars so clearly. Adam grunted acknowledgement. It's isolated. Is that why you chose it, for the isolation? The question struck closer to home than he liked. A man knows where he stands out here, no pretense. She seemed to consider this. I can understand the appeal of simplicity. But doesn't it get lonely? Can't miss what you don't need, he replied. Penelope turned to study his profile. Do you truly believe that, Mr. Xanders, that you don't need human connection? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Most women of his acquaintance, admittedly few, would never speak so boldly. I've managed well enough, he said finally. Managing isn't the same as living. Her voice carried no judgment, merely observation. My mother used to say that a life without connection is like a book no one reads. It may contain all the words, but its purpose remains unfulfilled. Adam felt a flicker of irritation. Your mother sounds like she never had to survive on her own. On the contrary, Penelope replied calmly. She was widowed at 23 when my father's first wife died birthing me. She raised me alone for 5 years before meeting my stepfather, Hiram. She knew solitude intimately. The revelation surprised him. Hiram isn't your father. He is in every way that matters. He raised me, educated me, loved me as his own. Her expression softened with obvious affection. Blood doesn't always define family, Mr. Xanders. The statement hung between them as Adam absorbed its implications. If Hiram wasn't her biological father, then the sheriff's description of swindlers posing as father and daughter might still fit, even if their relationship was genuine in its own way. Why are you telling me this? He asked, suspicion edging back into his voice. Penelope sipped her coffee before answering. Because you seem like a man who values honesty, and I didn't want there to be any misunderstanding between us. What misunderstanding would that be? That we're anything other than what we appear to be, 2 travelers down on their luck, grateful for your assistance. She set her cup down and stood. Good night, Mr. Xanders. Thank you for the coffee and conversation. As she walked away, Adam felt the weight of his suspicion like a physical burden. Her candor seemed authentic, yet Carson's warning echoed in his mind. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when trusting the wrong person could cost him everything he'd built. Yet something about Penelope Holbrook challenged his carefully constructed worldview. There was a directness to her, an absence of artifice that made his suspicions feel shabby by comparison. Tomorrow they would leave, and his life would return to normal. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it left him staring into the darkness long after the cabin had gone quiet, wondering why the prospect of returning to solitude no longer felt like the comfort it once had. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning. Adam rose early as was his habit, rekindling the fire and putting coffee on to boil. He was surprised to find Penelope already awake, seated at the table with one of his books open before her. "You're up early," he observed, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "I've always enjoyed the quiet of morning," she replied, accepting the offered drink. "There's a sense of possibility before the day has fully committed itself to a direction." Adam found himself nodding in agreement. It was precisely why he valued this time, before the demands of the ranch claimed his attention. "We'll be ready to depart within the hour," she continued. "Hiram is just gathering our things from the lean-to." "No rush," Adam said, surprising himself. "Roads won't get any better with haste." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "Nevertheless, we've imposed on your kindness long enough." "It's not," he stopped, unwilling to repeat his denial of kindness yet again. "You've been no imposition. In fact, you've more than earned your keep." Penelope closed the book, Wordsworth's Poems, he noted, and traced its worn cover with her fingertips. "This volume is well loved. You must find great comfort in these words." Rather than deflect as he normally would, Adam found himself answering honestly. "They remind me of my mother. She would read them aloud during winters in Missouri. Said poetry helped the soul survive when the body was merely enduring." "A wise woman," Penelope smiled. "My mother felt similarly about literature. She believed stories were maps for navigating life's complexities." "And what do you believe, Miss Holbrook?" Her eyes met his, direct and clear. "I believe that beauty exists even in harsh places if we have the courage to recognize it. That's what poetry teaches us, isn't it? To see beyond the surface to the truth beneath." Before Adam could respond, the door opened, admitting Hiram and a gust of cold morning air. The older man stamped his feet and rubbed his hands together. "Bitter morning, the desert shows its teeth early this time of year." The moment broken, Adam stood and moved to the fireplace, stirring the flames higher. "There's coffee. You should eat before you go." As they shared a simple breakfast, Adam found himself oddly reluctant to see them leave. Their presence had disrupted his routine, yet there was something rejuvenating about the conversation, the shared meals, even the cooperative work on the wagon. "What are your plans?" he asked as they finished eating. "Where will you go from here?" Hiram exchanged a glance with Penelope before answering. "We'll try Whispering Pines first. If prospects are as limited as you suggest, perhaps Tucson or even California eventually." Adam thought of Sheriff Carson's suspicions. If the Holbrooks were indeed the swindlers he described, sending them into town would be setting up his neighbors for theft. Yet everything about them spoke of genuine hardship and honest intentions. A decision crystallized in his mind. "There's another possibility," he said slowly. "I've been meaning to repair the line shack at the north end of my property. It needs work, but it's sound. You could stay there while you look for something more permanent." Hiram's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's very generous, but—" "I could use the help," Adam continued, committed now to his impulse. "Ranch this size is too much for one man, especially with winter coming. I can't pay much, but the cabin and meals would be part of the arrangement." Penelope's expression reflected cautious hope. "Are you certain, Mr. Xanders? You barely know us." "I'm a decent judge of character," he replied, hoping it was true. "And like I said, I need the help." After a brief consultation, Hiram extended his hand. "We accept your offer, Mr. Xanders, with gratitude. We won't disappoint your trust in us." As they shook on the arrangement, Adam caught Penelope's gaze. The warmth in her eyes sent an unfamiliar sensation through him, something like hope but more fragile. Whatever he'd just set in motion, there would be no returning to the solitary existence he'd known before. The line shack sat in a sheltered hollow near a small, year-round spring that fed into a creek crossing Adam's northern pasture. Though weathered and neglected, its log walls were solid and the stone fireplace intact. With Hiram's help, Adam replaced the damaged roof sections and repaired the shutters while Penelope scrubbed the interior until the single room gleamed with unaccustomed cleanliness. "It's perfect," she declared, surveying their work as evening approached on the third day. "With a few small touches, it will be quite comfortable." Adam, unused to praise, merely nodded. "It'll keep the weather out." "That's what matters." "Shelter is only part of what makes a home," she replied. but an important beginning. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Adam would ride out each morning to work the ranch, often with Hiram accompanying him. The older man proved surprisingly capable despite his academic background. He learned quickly, worked without complaint, and offered thoughtful solutions to the daily challenges of ranch life. Penelope maintained both households, tending gardens, preserving the late autumn harvest, and transforming simple ingredients into meals that reminded Adam of comforts long forgotten. She also revealed an unexpected talent with horses, gentling even the most skittish colts with patient hands and soft words. On Sundays, when work eased, they would gather at the main cabin for dinner and conversation that stretched long into the evening. Adam found himself sharing stories he hadn't recalled in years, tales of his childhood in Missouri, his father's dreams of Western prosperity, the war that had changed everything. In turn, the Holbrooks spoke of Boston, of academic life, of the financial reversals that had driven them west. Their openness gradually eroded Adam's lingering suspicions. Whatever the sheriff had heard about swindlers, he became convinced it couldn't refer to these people who worked so diligently and asked for so little. One crisp November evening, as the first serious cold front pushed down from the north, Adam invited them to share supper at the main house. A stew simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with savory aromas that spoke of comfort against the gathering winter. "Storm's coming," he observed as Penelope arranged bread and preserves on the table. "You might want to stay here tonight rather than risk the ride back in darkness." "We wouldn't want to intrude," she began, but Hiram interrupted with a laugh. "Nonsense, my dear, Mr. Xanders is simply being practical. Besides, I believe he's grown accustomed to our company, haven't you, Adam?" The use of his first name still felt novel, a recent development that marked a shift in their relationship from employer and hired help to something more like friendship. "The cabin's quiet without you," Adam admitted, surprising himself with the candor, "and Penny's cooking beats mine hands down." Penelope smiled at the nickname he'd begun using in recent days. High praise from a man who survived alone for years. "Surviving isn't living," he replied, echoing her words from weeks ago, "as someone recently reminded me." Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of change, of boundaries shifting like sand under water's persistent touch. Hiram cleared his throat. "Speaking of living, I had an interesting conversation with Jensen when we were in town yesterday. He mentioned that Whispering Pines has no schoolteacher. The last one left for California in the spring." Penelope looked up with sudden interest. "No teacher at all, what about the children?" "According to Jensen, most families manage as best they can. Some of the ranchers with means have hired tutors, but the town children go without formal education." "That's unacceptable," she said, a flush rising in her cheeks. "Education is every child's right, regardless of circumstance." Adam watched her passionate response with fascination. In that moment, with her eyes bright and her voice firm with conviction, Penelope Holbrook was truly beautiful, not merely in feature but in spirit. "Jensen suggested you might apply for the position," Hiram continued. "The town council meets next week to discuss the matter. They've apparently had difficulty attracting qualified teachers to such a remote location." Hope illuminated her face. "Do you think they would consider me, without references at hand?" "Your education speaks for itself," Hiram assured her, "and I believe Mr. Jensen would vouch for your character based on our dealings with him." "I'll speak for you too," Adam offered. "If that would help." Penelope turned to him, gratitude evident in her expression. "You would do that?" "Course I would," the words came easily, naturally. "You'd make a fine teacher. Those kids would be lucky to have you." As they continued their meal, discussing the possibilities that teaching would open for Penelope, Adam realized how dramatically his perspective had shifted in just a few short weeks. The solitude he had once cherished now seemed hollow compared to the warmth of shared purpose and conversation. Later, as Hiram dozed by the fire, Adam and Penelope sat at the table, a lamp between them casting soft light over the books they'd spread open. She had been helping him organize the ranch accounts, bringing order to the haphazard system he'd developed over the years. "Your cattle operation could be more profitable with some adjustments," she observed, tapping a column of figures. If you timed your sales differently and perhaps invested in better breeding stock. Adam leaned closer to see where she pointed, aware of the faint scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. Never thought much beyond getting through each season. That's survival thinking, she said gently. But you have the foundation for something more substantial here. With proper management, Lone Pine could become one of the territory's premier ranches. That what you see, potential? His question carried more weight than the words themselves suggested. Penelope met his gaze steadily. I see many things at Lone Pine that others might miss, Adam. The intimacy of the moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk but just as strong in its own way. Adam found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the subtle movement of her throat as she swallowed, the intelligence in her eyes that saw beyond his carefully constructed barriers. Penny, he began, uncertain what he meant to say. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Hiram stirred, breaking the spell. The moment passed, but something had changed. A possibility had opened between them that hadn't existed before. I should check the horses, Adam said, rising abruptly. Make sure they're settled for the night. Outside, the cold air cleared his head. Stars blazed overhead in the black velvet sky, witnesses to the confusion in his heart. For 8 years, he'd convinced himself that solitude was safer than connection, that independence was preferable to the vulnerability of caring for others. Now, those certainties were crumbling like dirt clods under summer rain. The following Tuesday, Adam drove the wagon into Whispering Pines with Penelope beside him and Hiram following on horseback. The town council had agreed to interview her for the teaching position, and Adam had insisted on accompanying them despite his usual aversion to town business. You don't seem nervous, he observed as they approached the cluster of buildings that constituted the settlement. Penelope smoothed her best dress, a forest green wool that complemented her complexion. I find purpose calms anxiety. These children deserve an education, and I'm qualified to provide it. The rest is merely formality. Her confidence impressed him. Here was a woman who had lost nearly everything yet maintained absolute faith in her own capabilities. It was a strength different from the kind the frontier typically demanded, but no less essential for survival. As they pulled up before the town hall, really just a large room above Jensen's store, Sheriff Carson emerged from his office across the street. Seeing them, he strode over, his weathered face unreadable. Xanders, he nodded. Miss Holbrook, Mr. Holbrook, in town for the teaching interview, I hear. Word travels fast, Adam replied, helping Penelope down from the wagon. Small towns run on gossip, Carson said mildly. Miss Holbrook, might I have a word with you before your interview? Won't take but a moment. Adam tensed, remembering the sheriff's earlier suspicions. Anything you need to say to her can be said to all of us. Carson raised an eyebrow. Protective, aren't you? Fine then. I received another wire from Santa Fe last week. Seems those swindlers they were tracking were apprehended in Albuquerque. Man and woman in their 30s, no relation to each other. He tipped his hat toward Penelope. Just thought you should know the matter's resolved. Wouldn't want any cloud hanging over your prospects here. Relief washed through Adam. Appreciate the information, Sheriff. Just doing my job, Carson replied. Good luck with the council, Miss Holbrook. Town needs a proper teacher. As the sheriff walked away, Penelope turned to Adam, her expression quizzical. What was that about swindlers? Adam hesitated, then decided honesty was required. When you first arrived, Carson warned me about some confidence tricksters working their way west. Said they posed as father and daughter. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You thought we might be criminals, that's why you were so suspicious at first. It passed quickly, he assured her. You're both too genuine to be anything but what you claim. Hiram chuckled. I'm not certain whether to be flattered by your final assessment or offended by your initial suspicion. Be flattered, Adam advised. I don't trust easily. Penelope studied him for a moment, then smiled. Yet you took us in despite your doubts. That speaks to your character, Adam Xanders. Before he could respond, the town hall door opened and Jensen waved them up. Council's ready for you, Miss Holbrook. The interview lasted just under an hour. When Penelope emerged, her face told the story before she spoke a word. They've offered me the position, she announced, eyes shining. beginning after the new year. The salary is modest, but there's housing included, a small room behind the schoolhouse. That's wonderful news, Hiram embraced her, pride evident in every line of his body. I knew they would recognize your qualifications. Adam felt a confusing mixture of emotions, happiness for her success tempered by the realization that she would be moving to town. The arrangement they'd established at Lone Pine had begun to feel permanent in his mind. Now change loomed again. Congratulations, he managed, tipping his hat. They're lucky to have you. Her smile faltered slightly as she studied his expression. I'd still like to help at the ranch when school isn't in session, if that's agreeable to you. Of course, he replied quickly. You're always welcome at Lone Pine. On the ride home, conversation flowed around plans for the school, the curriculum Penelope hoped to implement, the challenges of teaching different ages in a single classroom. Adam contributed little, his thoughts churning with the implications of this development. Why did her impending departure affect him so strongly? She would be just 15 miles away, not leaving the territory, yet the prospect of returning to the quiet isolation of before seemed suddenly intolerable. That evening, after Hiram had retired to the line shack, Adam found himself alone with Penelope on the porch. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke, and a quarter moon hung like a silver coin in the western sky. You've been quiet since we left town, she observed, wrapping a shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the evening chill. Adam leaned against the porch post, searching for words to express the tumult inside him, just thinking about changes coming. Change is the only constant in life, she said softly. Though that doesn't make it any easier to accept. Will you be happy teaching, living in town? The questions weren't what he truly wanted to ask, but they were safer than the alternatives. Penelope considered before answering. I believe I'll find fulfillment in teaching. As for happiness, she turned to face him directly. I've discovered that happiness depends less on location than on connections. Don't you agree? The directness of her gaze demanded equal honesty. Never gave it much thought before you arrived. Figured contentment was the most a man could expect out here. And now I'm not so sure. He took a deep breath, venturing further than he'd allowed himself before. Having you and Hiram here has changed things. Changed me, maybe. Her expression softened. In what way? Made me question whether being alone is really living, like you said. The admission cost him something, but the relief of speaking the truth outweighed the discomfort. You brought life back to Lone Pine, Penny. Don't know how to go back to the quiet after that. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the moonlight reflected in her eyes. Perhaps you don't have to. What do you mean? Hiram will still be here helping with the ranch, she pointed out. And I'll visit whenever I can. The schoolhouse isn't so very far. It's not the same, Adam said, finding courage in the darkness. It's you I'd miss most, Penny. The words hung between them, too honest to be withdrawn. Penelope's breath caught audibly, and for a terrible moment, Adam thought he'd overstepped. Then she reached out, her hand finding his in the shadows. I would miss you too, Adam. More than I should, perhaps. Her fingers were warm against his calloused palm. Adam closed his hand around hers, marveling at how such a simple touch could send ripples of awareness through his entire body. What are we doing here, Penny? He asked softly. I believe, she replied, her voice equally quiet, we're discovering that some connections can't be explained or denied. Only experienced. Adam's free hand moved to touch her cheek, a gesture so gentle it surprised even him. Penelope leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I never expected you, he whispered. Never thought I needed anyone. And now I can't imagine Lone Pine without you in it. The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, Adam lowered his head until his lips brushed hers, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. The kiss was brief but profound, a promise and a question wrapped together. When they parted, Penelope's eyes remained closed for a moment longer, as if preserving the sensation. This complicates things, she said finally, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Life out here is already complicated, Adam replied, finding unexpected lightness in his heart. Might as well be complicated together. Her laughter, soft and musical in the darkness, sealed something between them, an understanding that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as separate individuals but as something more. As winter settled over the Arizona territory, bringing shorter days and long, cold nights, life at Lone Pine adjusted to new rhythms. Penelope divided her time between preparing for her teaching position and helping at the ranch. Adam found himself looking forward to evenings in a way he never had before, anticipating the conversations, the shared meals, the quiet moments when hands might touch or gazes hold. Hiram observed their growing attachment with apparent approval, often finding reasons to retire early or occupy himself with tasks that left them alone together. If he had concerns about their developing relationship, he kept them private. Christmas approached, a holiday Adam had barely acknowledged in years of solitude, but Penelope insisted on proper observance, decorating the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons scavenged from her trunk of belongings. "We should have a proper celebration," she declared one evening in mid-December. "Invite some neighbors, perhaps even people from town." Adam's instinctive resistance to such sociability had weakened considerably. "If that's what you want. I want you to have a home filled with more than memories, Adam. The ranch has been your sanctuary, but it could be so much more." Her vision for Lone Pine both frightened and exhilarated him, a future so different from the isolated existence he'd constructed, yet increasingly appealing. Especially if she remained part of it, the Christmas gathering proved less daunting than Adam had feared. Jensen and his wife came from town, along with Sheriff Carson and the young couple who ran the boarding house. A few neighboring ranchers accepted the invitation, curious about the woman who had apparently breached Adam Xanders' famous reserve. The cabin glowed with lamplight and the warmth of bodies pressed closer than its modest dimensions typically allowed. Penelope had prepared an impressive feast, and Hiram led the group in Christmas carols, his academic voice surprisingly melodious. Adam, watching from a corner as Penelope moved among their guests with natural grace, felt something unfamiliar expanding in his chest, a sense of possibility he'd long since abandoned. This could be his life, not merely existing on the frontier but truly living, building something meant to last. Later, after the guests had departed and Hiram had tactfully retired to the line shack despite the cold, Adam and Penelope sat before the fireplace. A small pine tree, cut from his own land, stood in the corner adorned with paper ornaments she had crafted. "Thank you," he said simply. Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "For the party. For showing me what Lone Pine could be, what I could be with the right person beside me." She lifted her face to his, eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "And what is that, Adam Xanders?" "Happy," he said, the word feeling foreign yet right on his tongue. "Whole, part of something bigger than just surviving." Their lips met in a kiss deeper than those they had shared before, carrying the weight of growing feeling and future promise. When they parted, Adam reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much," he said, suddenly uncertain, "but I wanted you to have something." Penelope unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside lay a silver brooch shaped like a delicate flower with a small pearl at its center. She gasped softly, running her finger over the intricate work. "Adam, it's beautiful, but this must have cost." "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things I brought west. She'd want you to have it." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on her. Tears gathered in her eyes as she pinned it to her dress. "I'll treasure it always." "There's more I want to give you, Penny," Adam said, finding courage in her acceptance. "If you'll let me." Her hand covered his. "What do you mean?" "A life here at Lone Pine." "With me," the words came haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. "I know you're set on teaching, and that's as it should be, but maybe in time you might consider making this place your home." "Permanently?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Adam Xanders, are you proposing to me?" "Doing a poor job of it, I expect," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But yes, I love you, Penelope Holbrook." "Never thought I'd say those words to anyone, but there they are, true as anything I know." Joy transformed her face, making her more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. "I love you too, Adam. Have almost from the beginning, though I scarcely dared admit it." "Then you'll marry me, even knowing what a stubborn, solitary man I've been." I don't love who you've been, she replied, framing his face with her hands. I love who you are and who we could become together. Their kiss sealed the promise, a commitment deeper than words could express. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Lone Pine in a blanket of white that erased the harsh edges and transformed the landscape. Just as love had transformed the lonely rancher who had once believed his heart as barren as winter ground, the wedding took place on a clear February day, with the mountains standing witness in the distance. Sheriff Carson, who possessed authority to perform civil ceremonies, officiated in the front room of the cabin, now expanded with a new addition Adam and Hiram had worked through January to complete. Penelope wore a gown of ivory satin ordered from a catalog in Tucson, with her mother's lace veil and Adam's silver brooch pinned over her heart. Adam, uncomfortable but dignified in a new suit, watched her approach on Hiram's arm with an expression of wonder that moved even the most stoic attendees. Never seen Xanders look like that, Jensen whispered to his wife, like a man who's found gold after years of digging. The ceremony was simple but profound. When Adam spoke his vows, his voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had considered every word before offering it. Penelope's response rang with equal conviction, her eyes never leaving his as she promised herself to him for all their days to come. By the authority vested in me by the Arizona Territory, Carson pronounced finally, I declare you husband and wife. Xanders, you may kiss your bride. The cheer that went up when their lips met surprised Adam, who had momentarily forgotten they had an audience. Penelope laughed against his mouth, a sound of pure joy that he knew he would spend a lifetime trying to elicit again and again. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing spilling out onto the porch as the small cabin couldn't contain all the well-wishers. Many had come out of curiosity as much as friendship. The reclusive rancher's marriage to the new schoolteacher was the most exciting news Whispering Pines had generated in years. As twilight deepened into night, Adam found a moment alone with Hiram, who had watched the proceedings with the proud demeanor of a father seeing his daughter well-matched. I want you to know, Adam said, that Lone Pine will always be your home too. What you've built here with us, it matters. Emotion shone in the older man's eyes. Thank you, my boy, but you and Penelope deserve your privacy as newlyweds. I've been thinking of taking a room in town, at least during the school term. Would be easier for looking after Penny during her teaching days. Your family now, Adam insisted. The line shack is yours for as long as you want it, or the main house if you prefer. Hiram clasped his shoulder. Family works both ways, Adam. Part of caring for each other is knowing when to give space. But I appreciate knowing I have a place here. Later, when the guests had finally departed and they were truly alone for the first time as husband and wife, Adam drew Penelope into his arms in the privacy of their bedroom. Happy Mrs. Xanders, he asked, still marveling at the reality of her presence in his life. Beyond words, she replied, her arms encircling his neck, though I do have some news that might add to our happiness. Something in her tone made him pull back slightly to study her face. What news? Penelope took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach. If my calculations are correct, Lone Pine will welcome a new resident come autumn. For a moment, Adam couldn't speak, overcome by emotions he had no names for. Then he gathered her close, burying his face in her hair to hide the tears that sprang unbidden to his eyes. A baby, he whispered finally, our baby. The beginning of our family, she confirmed, her own voice thick with emotion. Are you pleased? Adam drew back to look at her, letting her see everything in his expression, the wonder, the gratitude, the love that seemed to expand with each passing day. Please doesn't begin to cover it, Penny. You've given me everything I never knew to ask for. The kiss they shared then was a promise, a celebration, and a prayer of thanksgiving all at once, for the life they had found together and the future stretching before them like an open trail, no longer lonely but rich with shared purpose and abiding love. On a golden October afternoon, as cottonwood leaves turned to flame along the creek and the air carried the first hint of winter's approach, Penelope gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah Elizabeth after both their mothers, but called her Ellie, a name all her own for a life all her own. Adam held his newborn child with hands that had once known only work and warfare, now gentle with a wonder he could scarcely comprehend. Her tiny fingers wrapped around one of his, a grip so fragile yet so determined that it seemed to contain all the promise of the future in its simple strength. "She has your eyes," Penelope said from the bed, exhausted but radiant with the fierce joy of new motherhood. "And your spirit, I expect," Adam replied, carefully returning the infant to her mother's waiting arms. "Heaven help us all when she's old enough to argue." Laughter filled the room, Hiram's from where he stood by the window, the midwife's as she gathered her things, and Penelope's, threading through everything like a ribbon of pure light. Adam Xanders, once the loneliest rancher in the territory, stood surrounded by the family he had never sought but now couldn't imagine living without. Through the window he could see lone pines stretching toward the mountains, no longer merely a place of survival but truly a home, their home, built on love that had found firm footing in what had once seemed the loneliest place on earth. And in that moment, with his wife's smile illuminating the room and his daughter's future bright before them, Adam knew with absolute certainty that he had found the greatest treasure the frontier could offer. Not gold or land or cattle, but the courage to open his heart to love and be loved in return. The lesson the wilderness had finally taught him wasn't about survival at all, but about living, fully, completely, with all the vulnerability and strength that true connection demanded. It was a lesson worth every mile of the journey, every day of solitude, every doubt overcome. For in the end, what made the difference wasn't the place itself, but the people who transformed it from wilderness into sanctuary. And for that, Adam would be grateful all the days of his life.